when you read a passage of Scripture, it's important to look in front and behind and to see everything around it to see exactly what the author is trying to get across. Why did he say this in 1 Corinthians 13? You find out when you look at chapter 12, and you find out when you look at chapter 14, right? The last verse of chapter 12 says what? Therefore, earnestly desire the greatest gift, then he leads into love, right? And so as you look at the end of chapter 12 and beginning of chapter 14, you see the connectors. What's going on here in the church of Corinth is people are mistreating each other. Some of it's selfishness, some of it's pride, some of it's bringing the world into the church. We go through chapters 1 and 2, we see that they're sophist. Sophia, that's a word people use oftentimes to sound smart. It's a Greek word for wisdom. They were people who were caught up on themselves and caught up on who they were, okay? Now, that is the sophist, all right? You go a little bit later, you see folks who are suing each other. You see folks who are living in adulterous relationships. You see people who are letting other folks starve because they're wanting to show off just how wealthy they are. And then you see people fighting in the worship service, in the services there. They're fighting one another because they say, hey, listen, my tongue speaking is better than your prophecy speaking. Or my gift of knowledge is better than your gift of faith. And so they're trying to rank each other. All right? Now, that's funny looking at the Corinthians with them doing that because that doesn't happen at all in the church today, right? Maybe. Kind of happens in the church today, doesn't it? I'll never forget when I first started youth ministry. I graduated from college. What happened was I got engaged with Kyla, and she was one of these old-fashioned traditionalist people that I didn't like. She was like, we can't get married till you have a job. I was like, what? What in the world thing is that? What do you mean I can't get married till we get a job? Oh, so I sent out applications everywhere. Somebody in Mississippi hired me. I went down there, and I'll never forget, the secretary had messed up somebody's name. I think misspelled a name or whatever it was. And I was sitting there in the foyer, and this lady came in, and it was her grandson's nephew. It was some weird relation, person I'd never seen, never would see. And she came in, and she said, don't you realize what family I belong to, and don't you realize how important I am? And I mean, she just yelled that to the secretary. Now, 24 years old, 3 Bible degrees, people know more than they should. I told that lady. I said, oh, we're all equal before God. There's nobody more important than anybody else. She did not agree with me because her granddaddy had done something a generation ago to do something that I don't even remember what it was. And so sometimes people think, man, I'm important to this church, or, man, I better get a vote in this or whatever because you see how much I give. Or somebody says, hey, listen, I'm the preacher, I'm an elder, I'm a deacon, and we start rolling those things through there, okay? People do that in the church today. What were the apostles doing when Jesus began washing feet? Remember what that argument was about? Who's the greatest? Peter says, man, I'm the spokesman. John says, I'm the one that Jesus really loves. You go through. Judas could have said, hey, listen, I'm the only one from the same region, Judea, that Jesus is from. We're brethren. He ought to love me more. Everybody's ranking themselves. And so that's going on. That is rampant in this church. When you go through 1 Corinthians 13, every problem they have, except maybe the father's wife deal going on, everything that's going on in 1 Corinthians 13 comes back to that. And so in many ways, all of 1 Corinthians is pointing to chapter 13, talking about the kind of love or what love really is. And so Paul cranks up here in chapter 13, beginning in verse 1, right? 1 through 3. And what he's going to show them is love is the greatest gift. Okay? Let's go ahead and read that. 1 Corinthians 13, let's look at verses 1 through 3. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels. Let me see where I'm at. But I have not love, I become nothing more than what? Sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. Okay? And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so I could remove mountains, if I have not love, I have what? Nothing. And though I give or bestow all my goods to feed the poor, though I give my body to be burned, if I have not love, it profits me nothing. Okay. Now, remember Corinth is in Greece. Greece In this culture, what they cared about was eloquence, right? Cicero stuttered as a young man, and do you remember what he did? He went to the seashore and got all those pieces of gravel. You ever hear that in rhetoric? You take rhetoric in school. Filled his mouth with gravel and practiced yelling to where he could be heard over the waves. And because of the way that he had to hold his mouth when he had all that gravel in there, he cured himself from stuttering. He cured himself from that way because you could not be a leader in Greece unless you were eloquent. In Acts chapter 17, people heard Paul. They sent him up on the Areopagus, or as we call it, Mars Hill. Because what did the Athenians, those Greeks, do for fun? They listened to spokesmen. They wanted to hear people talk. And even if what you said was garbage, if you said it in a beautiful way, they would love it. And so they would oftentimes try to find somebody who would play what we call today devil's advocate, come up with the craziest doctrine, and they'd want to say, okay, now you take that doctrine and prove to us it's true with your eloquence. And that's what they did for fun. They loved rhetoric. They loved speaking to one another, and they treasured somebody who was just smooth as could be. That's why when Paul's traveling through here, through Greece, in Acts chapter 16, 17, and 18, and that's why when you read in 1 Corinthians and 2 Corinthians, you read Paul oftentimes say, I did not come with eloquence of speech. I did not come in a great smooth way of talking. What he's trying to say is, listen, I'm not taking a crazy doctrine and shaping it where you would fall for it. No, he says, I'm just teaching the gospel. It's not through this eloquence. It is through the power of the word. It's the gospel that has the power. And so he starts off with the big one for the Greeks. Secondly, he says, though I have faith that can move the mountains, all right? And though I have all knowledge. In other words, what we see here is doctrine. A person can have the right doctrine and be wrong. Now, we don't always believe that in the Lord's church. But a person can have the right doctrine and be wrong. Why? Because they don't love. We run over to Revelation chapter 2 and read about the church in Ephesus. Remember? They're known far and wide for their good works. We see the Ephesians there in Acts 17. We see 1 and 2 Timothy. Timothy was a preacher at what church? Ephesus, right? We see the book of Ephesians, all right? These people had the best preaching available in the first century, and they were known far and wide for their good works. But Jesus says, this I have against you. You have left your first love. They had the right doctrine, but they were cold. They weren't zealous. They didn't have the right love. You can be able to explain why we don't use instruments, why we baptize for remission of sins, why the church is not a denomination. You might be able to tell us why we have male leadership in the church, why we take the Lord's Supper on the first day of the week, why we make sure that we follow everything in Scripture and be able to give an answer for everything. But if you don't have the right attitude, guess what? You're no different than the most heathen person out there. Jesus says it this way, John 4:24, God is spirit, and those who worship must worship in what? Spirit and in truth. You've got to have the right attitude. That attitude is important. Now, in our religious world, we're flipping around the other way. We never stay in the middle. We always go one way or the other. People say the Lord's church used to be heavy on doctrine, short on love and grace. Now, many people in the church are throwing out doctrine, but they're saying, just love people. If you just love them, everything will be okay. And Jesus just loved. If you just show mercy and stop teaching doctrine all the time, then you'll please God. Is that what the Bible teaches? No. If I say someone's saved without following the gospel of Christ, I've made myself God because I've changed the rules to go my way. Does that do you any good? No, I'm not God. You're not God. He's God. You got to let God be God. You got to have the doctrine and you got to have love. And so for some of these folks who knew the doctrine, Paul right here is saying, hey, listen, love is necessary. Some of these folks, as you go through here in verse 2, you're looking there and you can see some of these great miracles, okay? You know, hey, listen, I've got this faith. Hey, listen, I can speak with these tongues. Hey, listen, I can do this or that. And Paul says, no matter what miraculous gift you have, no matter what doctrine or talents we have today, if you don't do it with love, you're going to destroy the church. And you're going to ruin the church. There are some preachers who are eloquent and smooth as can be, and they will tear a church up in 2 seconds because they don't have love. Some preachers who know doctrine, and man, they can quote scripture day and night, and they will tear up a church because they don't have love. Number 3, verse 3, though I give all my money to feed the poor, though I give up my body and let it be burned, though I become a martyr for Christ, okay, sacrificing here, if I don't have love, what's the result? Nothing. All right, you ever see people who try to buy their way into heaven? I'm not talking about money. I'm talking about works. They see a shortcoming in their life, and so they're going to do so good and do so much, it makes up for it. And so maybe they give a check that has all the extra O's on it, zeros at the end. Maybe they wear themselves out in VBS and wear themselves out in gospel meetings and wear themselves out serving in this way and that way and everything that goes along. Maybe they do all this stuff, but if you don't have the right attitude, it doesn't do you any good. Now, work that through, those first 3 verses, and look at that last verse of chapter 12. Okay? We've just talked about the 9 in chapter 12, the 9 miraculous gifts, right? Bring those all there, and he says, but let me show you the greatest. Now, some people have taken this contextually in their commentaries and said, well, this must be a miraculous measure of love. I don't think that's what Paul's preaching here. What's Paul saying? Let me show you the greatest gift. In those first 3 verses, he says, all the stuff you do without love, it's nothing. What's he trying to say? If you speak with tongues, you better do it with love. You have prophecy, you better do it with love. You have healing, you better do it with love. You're interpreting, you better do it with love. You have faith, you have knowledge, you have discernment, you better do it with love. So what we see here is the necessity. Now, is love important in the church today? It absolutely is, isn't it? It is absolutely vital that we have love in the church today. Because you know what? I've been here 3.5 years, and you probably have come across a recognition. I'm not perfect. Now, if you haven't noticed that yet, don't worry. Keep thinking I'm perfect. And guess what? I don't know how long you've lived with you. Probably your whole life. Hopefully, otherwise we got to do some talking. But are you perfect? Okay? You put imperfect people together, are you going to have problems? Oh, man. And so what do we got to have for one another, according to this chapter? Love, okay? Recognize I'm a doofus and I say dumb stuff from the pulpit sometimes. Please love me enough just to giggle when I say something really weird, right? Remember one lady who was taking notes for me when I first started preaching. She showed me the notes. I was looking through it, and I quoted not only 2nd Philippians, but 3rd Philippians, okay? Problem number 1 is I said it. Problem number 2 is she wrote it down and never caught it, all right? Sometimes things come out of here that I'm not sure where they came from, Well, each one of us in the church are going to make mistakes. And we've got to love others the way we want them to love us. Because there's not a one of us who's perfect. There's not a one of us who has all of our game together. We got to have love for one another. Forgiveness, mercy, and grace. That's what Paul's bringing out here. All right. Now, verses 4 through 7. We have, 15 descriptors of love. Okay? And if I was really trying to fill up all of our time, we'd go through each one of these descriptors. But let me go ahead and read it. Okay? Verse 4. Love suffers long. Okay? Jerry Barber. Y'all know Jerry Barber, right? He preached here every once in a while. Okay? He says love is long suffering. All right? He does a lot longer than I do. He runs marathons. All right? What's he trying to get across? If you are long suffering, what does that mean? You're patient. You put up with people, right? I can deal with somebody when they make a mistake. I can deal with somebody like the second time they make a mistake. After that, I'm like, okay, we're done. That's not love. That's not love. Love suffers long. All right, sorry about that. I got distracted. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. Love is not puffed up. It does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, and it thinks no evil. It does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. I like to steal a little bit from verse 8. Love never fails. It belongs better in verse 8, but I like to include it here as well. You take all those descriptors, how would you put all those together? Suffers long, kind, doesn't envy, doesn't show off, it's not puffed up, it's not rude, doesn't seek its own, it's not provoked, and thinks no evil. Doesn't get excited when it sees other people mess up, doesn't rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. How would you boil all that down?
You want to be around people that has all those attributes.
Right, you want to be around people that have all those attributes. Oftentimes we'll spend time working on that word love, right? And I think I did that in our notes. You got eros, which is a romantic love. That's what boys feel for girls and girls feel for boys, right? It's that romantic love, okay? You have storge, which means I really like stuff. I like hamburgers. I like watermelon, okay? I like church, okay? That's love. You got phileo, which is a familial love, what you feel for your family, which is very strong. And an agapeo, or as we say colloquially, agape, right? That is a self-sacrificing love. That is a love that surrenders ourselves, wants what's best for somebody else. Okay, so define that for me. As we go through here, notice each one of these is sacrificial love. Love suffers long. Is that sacrificial? Yeah, it lets people make more than one mistake. It lets people mess up as we go along. Is love kind? Do you have to be sacrificial to be kind sometimes? Okay. Is Christianity about being nice to the folks who are nice to us? Jesus says the world does that, right? I'm nice to somebody because they're nice to me. Somebody gives me $1, I'll smile to them, right? What's Christianity do? Okay, you love your enemies, which, by the way, is no fun, right? Somebody slaps you on the cheek, you turn them to your other. Someone says, hey, you got to walk a mile with me, you go with them too. Someone takes your outer cloak and you say, hey, why don't you take the rest of my clothes as well? That's that idea of sacrificing. It's a sacrificing love. Being kind and polite to your enemies, wanting what's best for them. It doesn't envy, doesn't show off, parade itself, is not puffed up, okay? You're the guy you work with who may be at the factory, hasn't worked as long as you. He gets a raise and a promotion. Are you happy for him or are you hacked off? Love will do what? Be happy for that person, right? Okay. Is not rude, not seeking its own, does not get provoked. Okay, you see folks who lose their temper all the time? Sure you do, right? And sometimes it's us. Love is not going to blow up, okay? All right, thinks no evil. Look at verse 7. It bears all things, okay? In other words, you're willing to bear with somebody and put up with them. Believes all things. What's this mean to believe all things? When you hear something about somebody, do you try to believe what's best in them, or do you try to focus on what's wrong with them? Our culture and society has changed greatly in the last generation. Because now, what do we do with our leaders? Do we respect them, or we look for the holes?
Turn on the TV and you find out.
Right. Historically, and this is something that bothers me quite a bit, something as simple as our money, $20 bill. We're anxious to take Jackson off the $20 bill. And really, it doesn't matter to me one way or the other because I don't get to hold my 20s very long. They all disappear. You know, I barely even meet the guy on there. All right? That was put on there in the 1920s because people liked Jackson. You know, he did the Louisiana Purchase. He was one of those guys who really freed up a lot of the country and everything else. Now, if you look in the past 10 years, it is hard to find a book that is positive any way about that man. because they look at the way in which he destroyed the Indians. They look at the way in which he was rough around the White House because he was the people's president. He allowed people to get into the White House and tear it up. And they look at the things that are wrong. We oftentimes will find our leaders, and instead of focusing on what they do well, we focus on what they do wrong. And you look at a lot of the historical stuff that we do, whether it be Washington, whether it be Jefferson, we focus on their shortcomings. Oh, he owned slaves. Oh, he did this, or oh, he did that. And we take all that, and we forget to look at what they did that was good, what they did that was positive. And that's historically speaking. Now, if you write a biography of a historical figure, if you're going to sell books and if you're going to fit in, you have to write about everything that's wrong with them. Okay? Now, do we do that in modern day? Do we see that happen in the church? You know, one of the problems that happens in the church, remember that old saying? Stewed elders and roasted preachers is what we eat every Sunday dinner. Okay? In other words, what everybody in church does wrong. And then we're shocked when our children leave the church. Why are they going to leave the church? Because what did they hear from us? Positive things or negative things? One of the reasons I became a preacher because I love God, because it's something I really, really, really wanted to do. Not sure if we have elders in here. I would do this even if I wasn't paid. Oh, Sonny. All right, don't leave that when budget time comes up. But, you know, this is something I really love to do. And one of the reasons for that, I grew up, and my heroes were always the preachers. They could quote scripture left and right. And come to find out, the congregation where I was, they had a lot of really good preachers. But I really appreciated, enjoyed watching them stand up, watch the good things that they did. I was fascinated by the work. You know, it was something I really looked up to. So when the opportunity came, it took me a while to get there, mid-20s or so, but I thought, man, I want to be a preacher. That's something I really want to do. He was for a little while. He was an elder probably for about 5 years or so. I was the first person in my family to go to college and first person in my family to be a preacher. And so, yeah, my parents grew up in a church. It's kind of funny. Kyla's family has a preacher in every generation all the way back to the Civil War. And they were in the Methodists, and then they came through the Restoration movement and all of that. So there's a bunch of preachers over there. My side of the family, when I walk in a room at the family reunion, it gets hushed, you know. But they're like, whoa, the preacher. All right. You know, it doesn't really fit with my family. I mean, we're good folks, I think, you know, for the most part. We got a few black sheep. You know, if you don't have a black sheep in the family, it means you're the black sheep, right? And so, you know, there's a few of them that are interesting in the way they live. But I'm the first one to go through and do that. So it's kind of an interesting family dynamic. Like I say, when I go home at the family reunion, they all have to get hushed when I walk around, you know. But anyway, that's one of the things I looked up to. Now today, boys growing up in our church today, what do they want to be when they grow up? Do they want to be preachers? You know, you wonder. I got to teach the second grade class here for a while. It was funny. You know, I taught the class, and at the end of it, I said, okay, guys, let's talk about preaching. You know, do you want to be a preacher? And they're like, no, we want to run PowerPoint. That's pretty cool, the computer. And, you know, I think about it, I kind of want to do that myself, you know. But we have to really show the nobility of the job. For the best ones growing up to be in a church, you've got to show the nobility of the job that's there. That's something important. Thank you to Jarrett. Roger, you got, what, 2 kids doing the whole preaching thing? 2 kids preaching. Ah, bless your soul. All right. And that's one of the neat things about the church here, how many preachers we've got going on. I know you're 2. I know you're, what, 1 or 2? 1? Okay. And then we had Glenn who came. And there's a bunch of others. And part of that's because of the nobility of preaching. Preachers are held up here as something which is the church has a great legacy for. It's good stuff. All right, so how do we get from envy to talking about it being good to be a preacher? That's kind of a weird connection. But anyway, believes all things, looks at the best of other people. Let's keep looking. Believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. All right. Now we get to the part where it's a little bit thicker as we go along talking about love, because this is really contextually where Paul's headed to. 1 through 7 is getting us to here as far as the context, chapter 12 and chapter 14. Love never what? Fails, okay? We think of failure as in making a mistake and not going any further. Failure in this Greek context is more of, runs out of gas. Might be a way we could put it colloquially. It's something which will never stop. But where there are prophecies, what's going to happen? They're going to cease. Where there are tongues, they're going to fall silent. Okay? What Paul is saying is recognize something. This stuff you have is risen up right now, and tongue speaking is pretty awesome. Prophecy is pretty awesome. But what's going to happen? Is that going to last? No. What is going to last? Love. Love is what lasts. That's what we care about. When I was in high school, I was in high school on a ball team. They hired a guy to come write a book about the school. And the guy was named H.G. Bissinger. The purpose that he came, he said, I want to write Hoosiers for football. And he said, I think it's a great marketing strategy. That's what I'm after. So he came. It was a pretty big football team. He rode with us on a plane. He ate the meals with us. They gave him an apartment, gave him a car, all these things the school did. And he went with us to every meeting, everything. And the season ended not the way we wanted it to. He wrote a book. The book was named Friday Night Lights. And it's interesting when you read a book about your school and about yourself, and it doesn't match what you see about yourself and such. But if you ever read a book, it's around a guy named James Miles. And James Miles was a great football player. He's known as Booby. He was a great football player. He had all this sort of stuff, hey, you're going to be the greatest ever. Miami and Oklahoma, Notre Dame, all these people, coaches were coming in with us and trying to be his friend, saying, listen, you're going to be a millionaire in just a short time. Not when he went to college, when he went to the pros, theoretically. And they were really pushing him. Well, what happened to James? He made a cut on some strange AstroTurf when we were in Marshall. And when that happened, he blew out his knee. Did anybody care about him anymore? Those colleges want him to come still, willing to pay him money. It ended. And what the book Friday Night Lights is about is how a community will use a person for their purpose as a great football player. And as soon as the leg is gone, as soon as he can no longer fulfill that purpose, they throw him out. The book has racial overtones and other things such as that, but really that's what the book's about. The reason I bring that up is sometimes we emphasize the wrong thing. We forget these things really aren't important. Okay? What are some things that we emphasize in our life that's really not important compared to the gospel of Christ?
Dallas Cowboys.
Oh, easy now. He said the Cowboys. I don't know, man. Oh, it's America's team. That's the whole reason they have the hole in the roof, so God can watch. All right. Okay, sports. Is sports the American idolatry? Absolutely, one of them. How much does it cost to go to a football game? NFL? Hundreds? Okay.
According to 200 something.
Yeah.
According when they sell out, it wasn't more than
Okay, and they sell out. You go to a game at for the Dallas Cowboys, okay, the cheapest tickets at the very top, $140 a piece. You get down around there, okay, you're talking close to $1,000. It's $80 to park at the far lots. It's $140 to park at the near lots. They have 90,000 people at a game, and you have people begging to get in. Okay, $40 just to stand on the top tier where you can't really see, but they'll serve you $10 beer. But $40 to stand up there, and sometimes they'll have 10 or 15,000 people up there. Okay, something a little closer to home. How much does it cost to go to a game at Rupp? Huh?
Depending on where you sit.
It depends on where you sit. A couple $100, right?
I quit going to Rupp because you had to go through the mafia to get a ticket.
Just about. Yeah, you have to go through the mafia to get a ticket. Right.
Winter, they got an old guy standing out there with a plaid coat on and runners coming back and forth.
There you go.
They're trying to buy extra tickets coming in, and then
Yeah.
I got to do that. I just won't go.
Work in the system. Okay. Now, who in their right mind, I'm talking about football, not basketball, because basketball you can be in your right mind and spend all that. Not really. Who in their right mind is going to spend $200 to go sit in the sun watching 22 sweaty men jump on top of each other? Who in their right mind does that? And how long is a football game? 3 hours. Okay. Huh? Yeah, several thousand. And you got really goofy guys. Green Bay. Okay. Green Bay. How cold does it get in Wisconsin? I still haven't figured out why people live up there. Okay. They're paying all that money. All right. And then you bring them into the church building and tell them they got to listen to a 20-minute sermon and put $5 in the plate, and what are they going to say? No way, I'm not doing that, okay? Sports, in many ways, is our modern idolatry. That's what we care about. That's what we work on, okay? Other things is how we compare to other people, okay? Now, sports going to last forever? No. Now, some people, my son Matthew would do this. He's great at memorizing things. Who won national championship in 1983 in basketball? Somebody may know that. Me and other normal people don't, all right? Okay? Did it matter? They got rings. Yeah, that was cool. It doesn't matter. Those people are gone. They can't play football anymore. Now they're crippled or doing whatever. But it was the most important thing in their life at the time. What lasts? God. And so what he's doing here is saying, listen, you're worked up about these miracles. You're worked up about your rank in the church. You're worked up about all this stuff. You got to think about love, caring for one another, because that's what matters. And that's what's really neat when he pulls up verse 13. Faith, hope, and love now abide these three, but the greatest of these is what? Love. Faith and hope are very necessary. Hebrews 11, Romans 15:13 talk about faith and hope. Love is most important because that's what remains. Nothing in this world is more important than the love you feel for one another at church. And if this congregation is going to thrive and do well, we've got to love one another. Not like one another. That's important too. Love. The forgiving, merciful spirit of love has got to thrive among us. All right, we're done. No running in the halls until your parents come get you. Okay? See y'all later.